Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together. Well, good morning, folks. First off, let me tell you that it's good to be back home here in beautiful East Tennessee. Consistently warmer weather is awesome. My last work trip in Montana and Wyoming, I got to experience some more snowstorms, which, according to the people of these two states, is not uncommon this time of year. What I do not look forward to during these homecomings is the horrible traffic conditions here in Sevier County. Absolutely horrendous. And it looks like it is only going to get worse. That is because the good people of Sevier County continue to send the same people to city halls and the county government during every election. Voter apathy isn't just ruining our nation and our state, it is also ruining our county. Did you know that we have had the same county mayor for 47 years now? 47. That's ridiculous. Everywhere you turn in this county, some new subdivision is being put in on lots that are less than a quarter acre in size and without the necessary infrastructure in place to support that subdivisions, like roads. Heck, we don't even have enough water to meet the current needs of housing and tourism as it stands right now. But sure, keep electing the people that just want to increase the tax base here and cause further congestion and other problems. This is Einstein's definition of insanity at work right here, folks. Keep doing the same thing over and over and expect different results. Still, it is good to be home with my bride and my puppy, relaxing for a bit before I'm off to the Central Plains once again here in the near future. Now, as I promised during an earlier part of this series, in today's closing, I will be letting you know the name of a future guest on this podcast. I'm really excited about talking to this gentleman and sharing that conversation with the audience. I'm also scheduled to be a guest on another creator's podcast here this week. We start recording it later on, and as soon as I know when it will be released, I will be sharing those details on my website and social media accounts. And as is the norm for interview episodes, there will not be a segment break in the middle of my discussion this week. With that, let's take a stand in the arena with Mr. Archie for the final part of this 3-part episode and get on with the show. Welcome to Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines, exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil.
When I was in high school in 1971, I kept a 30-30 deer rifle and a 12-gauge shotgun in the back glass of my truck on school grounds.
Yeah, when I was going to school in Texas, at the high school there.
Yeah. And so,
back of their trucks.
Yeah. Until 1989, that was lawful in Tennessee when the Democrat governor and a Democrat Speaker of the House and a Democrat Lieutenant Governor and a plethora of Democrats in the House and the Senate decided they would take that right away from you. Now, if in fact we had that right from 1796 until 1989, how does that comport with the Bruin ruling that said, not all history is equal? Mm-hmm. And so what you have to do is you have to look at the text and the history of it, text first and then history. If your conduct implicates the Second Amendment, then the burden shifts instantly to government to prove that its infringement on your right comports with historical tradition from the time of the founding, 1791. That's when we ratified the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Right.
And so that's the date timestamp that the Supreme Court has put on your Second Amendment rights. If, in fact, the Tennessee government can't show you a statute that was generally accepted across the nation at that time, they can't enforce it now. And by the way, in 1796, there was no prescription against the carry of long guns in Tennessee. Not in 1801, not in 1821, not in 1870, and not until 1989. So how does that then comport with the Bruin basis that says that you must allow your citizens, if it has to do with the Second Amendment, to look at the text and the history, and then you have to follow what was in place at the time of the founding? Now, that's all true, and nobody ever argues that, but they just don't pay any attention to it at the General Assembly.
No, the governor will send his appointees to lobby
Yes.
the General Assembly to keep the provisions in place, and those lobbyists, or actually employees of the government, are paid for by the citizens.
That's correct. They certainly are.
So the governor is forcing us to pay for the restriction of our own rights.
You can go to our YouTube channel. You will see a number of times where the Department of Safety and the Sheriff's Association and the chiefs of police and the governor's spokesperson and the TBI will all run up there and testify, well, we're philosophically opposed to allowing the citizens of Tennessee to have their basic Second Amendment rights because we don't think it's a safe thing. And just within the last 6 weeks, Elizabeth Stroker, who's the legislative director for the Department of Safety, testified in a committee hearing that, well, we think that it's perfectly okay for people to carry handguns for their personal protection, and that's sufficient. And they don't need long guns. And I'm going, wait a minute, what? We got the Second Amendment not because the deer were coming after us, but because the British were attacking us, right? And so when you saw those people leave the shoals and march over the mountains to go to South Carolina, they didn't just carry handguns. Nope. They carried Pennsylvania and Kentucky rifles, which made them the most deadly group of individuals to ever traipse over the mountains. And they would not have handicapped themselves and said, oh, we think that's too much. We don't want to carry those long guns, those shotguns. How absurd is that?
Absolutely. I live in Sevier County, and I'm proud of the history of the man. I mean, John Sevier was a complete badass.
Yes, he was. Nola Chucky Jack was his stage name. And so every time somebody came at him, he pushed back. and people don't realize how much he had to do with writing the Tennessee Constitution, but they didn't want a warmonger in the room with them, so they kind of held him out, and some of these other guys but he had folks that he was giving information to that were carrying it in. Our Second Amendment analog was penned by John Sevier.
Right. And
that the free men of this state had the right to keep and to bear arms for their common defense because they said that was absolutely necessary.
Right. And to go from that in our state's founding, not the nation's founding, but just the state of Tennessee's founding, with the badass of the time, to what we have now, our current governor now with a so-called political party that is a defender of the Constitution is amazing to me. I call them trans-publicans because
you're right. That's a term that I use endearing as well. That's one of the nicer things I say about them, by the way. Here's something that everybody needs to understand. You need to get a copy of the Tennessee Constitution and read it because they haven't been able to completely abrogate the good parts of it. They've taken a lot of it out, but they moved it around a little bit. But we still now, if you go to Article 10, Section 16, it says the Declaration of Rights hereto prefix is declared to be a part of the Constitution of this state and shall never be violated on any pretense whatever. And to guard against transgression of the high powers that we have delegated, we declare that everything in the Bill of Rights contained is accepted out of the general powers of government and shall forever remain inviolate. Now,
yet what we have now.
What we've got is a watered down milk toast, pusillanimous, vestige of what was once a proud warrior society in Tennessee.
Mm.
And it's by design. They don't want you knowing that we won our liberty through sacrifice of blood and treasure. We didn't take that stuff laying down, and we didn't accept someone else's rules. We made our own rules, and we made a pretty good set of rules. And we said that it was supposed to last for our issue for time immemorial. But every time there's an old saw that says, no man's life, liberty, or property is safe as long as the General Assembly is in session.
Absolutely.
And that is every bit as true today as when it was coined.
Every time they're in session, your liberty is at risk.
We have joked from time to time that before you can pass a new law, you need to strip 5. I think that would be an absolute great situation. Because we got a lot more law. You go up there and look, when they first started this thing, the laws and the books were about 2 volumes. Now it's a whole shelf, right, stacked 8 deep. The whole point is they want to make it so confusing that you don't know. Consider this. In a lawsuit that I was witness to, argued just this last week before a 3-judge panel, talking about the ability of Tennesseans to carry firearms in parks. And so the argument by the state was, well, you can't make a facial challenge against 39-17-1307A because there are instances where you could convict a person. And the question was, what instances would that be? I said, well, under our definition of a firearm, you have to go to 022. And what it says that it includes destructive devices and missile launchers and battleships and poison gas. And that's how the General Assembly has defined firearms in Tennessee. It says that it's anything that you can either make or can readily convert to expel a projectile through an explosion. Then it goes in to say about other stuff too. And it gets down to things which are prohibited that the average person cannot own. You and I can't tote a grenade around. But their attorney stood up for that 3-judge panel saying if a person showed up in the park with a hand grenade, because that's defined as a firearm, then that would be a violation of the law. And so therefore you can't mount a facial challenge against 39-17-1307A because you could be convicted of a crime because a firearm is something that he can't have. And I mean, my deal is you can never talk to the government about getting your rights back because they have so badly determined what firearms are, and they've set it up on purpose so that you can never, ever get your Second Amendment rights back in the state of Tennessee, even though the Supreme Court of the United States has said you got to let those crumbs out there in the flyover region have those rights because they're people, and they have certain unalienable and indefeasible rights that you can't take away. Case in point, there was a case in Columbia about 4 years ago now. It's gone that far, I think. And it was a young man living in government supplied housing. And he said, it's dangerous out here. They keep stealing cars and holding people up in the parking lot. And I'm going to carry a gun. I'm going to get me a handgun. I'm going to keep it for my protection because you people aren't providing any. There's no security here. And they say, hey. Now, you signed an agreement when you moved into this, we're paying for you to stay here, that you'll have no firearms. He said, I've read Bruin. I don't think that's the rule anymore. And they said, well, you get you a handgun and see what happens. So he told us, I'm going to do it. They searched his place, found it, moved his stuff out, threw him out. He sued, went all the way to the appellate court of the state of Tennessee. And a justice whose father used to be a Democrat governor, Justice Clemens, said, here's the thing, folks, Bruin has changed this game. And it is said that every person has a right to carry a firearm for their own protection. And it is said that it is unalienable and indefeasible. And so therefore you can't take that right away from him. He can't sign it away. So you have to let him move back in. You have to let him have his handgun back. Now, that was ruled by the appellate court of the state of Tennessee, but nobody wants to talk about it, does it? And they don't want to talk about the Andrews v. State case in 1871 that said this mess that they just put in our Constitution is unconstitutional. I've read it into the record. I've read in that the Supreme Court of the United States incorporated the Second Amendment against the states, but nobody wants to hear it. And so forth, they don't pass the statutes And the Department of Safety says, well, if they don't do it statutorily, we've got to enforce what's on the books, even though every person that takes a position of profit or trust in the state government, if they get paid from the public treasury, they have to take an oath before they proceed to business to protect and defend the Constitution of this state and of the United States. That's every person from the governor to the dog catcher.
And we know just following orders is not a valid defense.
It is not, but that's what they say they're doing. Oh, we're just following what the statutes say.
Right.
That's a little Hitler-esque to me, I think.
Absolutely.
So, and I do tend to ramble on, and
Hey, it's been a pleasure having you on. We got to do this again.
Anytime that you have the space, I'm more than willing to come in and pontificate, because I've got a wealth and store of knowledge that I have dug up. I've been researching this stuff now for 30 years.
Absolutely. And so yeah, let's get together about a month and let's go over what the latest General Assembly's action, this current General Assembly's actions have.
Okay, so the two most egregious things they did this time, there was a bill that would have allowed long gun carry into the enhanced carry permit portion, so that every person that's lawfully allowed to carry a long gun would have had to have a background check, be vetted by the TBI, and do all that, and which would have simply carried us back to the original construct of the Tennessee Constitution, but only allowed those people who had perfected that permit. They killed it in the Senate. We had two senators over there, Todd Gardenhire and Paul Rose, who voted with the two Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee to not pass that through and to let the full Senate have a vote on it. Now, what happens is if you get it out of committee and it gets on the floor and they know that you got a bunch of people going to be up for election next year, that stuff passes when it gets there. But they use the committee system in the state of Tennessee to make sure it don't get there, because they don't like you being armed.
Gardner, he's just a straight up commie. I don't know why he gets reelected as a Republican.
Well, I did an interview with him. As you well know, there were a number of people who had primary challengers last time. And Senator Gardenhire, who's the chairperson of the Senate Judiciary Committee, had a challenger. And so I sent out invitations to everybody that had a primary contender. Mr. Rose's primary contender dropped out, so he did not avail himself of answering the questions. But I sent the questions out at least 3 weeks prior to the interview. So they had plenty of time to study and get with their people and to make sure that they said exactly what they wanted in their stump speech. All right. And so what I did at the end of this thing is I took the question that said, what do you think about allowing Tennesseans the ability to carry a long gun for their all lawful purposes? And he said, oh, I think it's a great idea. In fact, turned around and pointed and said, see that? That's a 12-gauge shotgun sitting right there. I keep it loaded, ready to go all the time. That's a great idea. But when that issue came up before him in committee, he said, you see a scar on my nose? Old boy pulled a double barrel shotgun on me years and years ago, and he put it right on the bridge of my nose and he broke the skin. That's where I got that scar. He said, that's a long gun. He said, I don't think that's the right thing to do, so I'm going to vote no. Now, you were talking less than 4 months in between those two questions and answers, which were the exact same question, but totally different answers, because one was a candidate looking to get elected. The other was an authoritarian trying to tell you what he expected you to do, because he was listening to that group of individuals. There were 5 of them that came up there. You had the legislative director for the Department of Safety. You had the lobbyist for the Sheriff's Association and the chiefs of police. You had both the executive director of the District Attorney General's Conference and the assistant director of the Attorney General's Conference testify that they were opposed to that. And you had the head attorney for the TBI come in, and all of them were opposed to it. And as I understand that, except for the TBI, which I still haven't figured out who they work for, even though they're taxpayer paid, and it says investigation in their name. It doesn't say law enforcement. It doesn't say legislator, does it? So, but every time I've got a video that you can go find of their executive director, Mr. Roush, testifying in a House committee meeting. And when he was asked by Gino Balso, he said, wouldn't you agree that if the Constitution says that it's a person's right to carry a long gun for all lawful purposes, that we should allow people in Tennessee to carry under the permit? He goes, no. He said, and I've done a deep dive into Heller and DeBruin, and I understand this, and their guidance says that the state can regulate this. He doesn't understand what regulate means. He doesn't understand what that word meant at the time of the founding. It meant to make sure that both barrels of a fowling piece pointed to the same point of aim at 40 yards, and that you were well practiced and you knew how to shoot your gun. It didn't mean the government could control what you did with it. It had nothing whatsoever to do with that. In fact, in Heller, it describes what that means. Nothing more than practiced in the use of is what Scalia said there. And yet, oh no, we get to regulate. They don't get to regulate. That's a power that they've taken that they weren't delegated by the people, and we've been slovenly and let them get by with it. Absolutely. But he said in testimony, he said, by the way, I've done all this stuff. And he said, and if you want to carry a long gun, at the time of the ratification of the Constitution, it was muskets. And so if you want to carry a musket, I guess I'd be okay with that. Mm. Now, what Scalia said in Heller was bordering on the frivolous. There are those that say only those weapons that were in use at the time of the founding protected by the ambit of the Second Amendment. We don't treat the First Amendment that way. In fact, we protect text messages and cell phone calls and all these different methods of sending communication. We say that's sacrosanct, that you have that ability for free speech, right? That's right. We don't treat the First Amendment that way. You don't treat the Fourth Amendment that way. Police departments have got these FLIR things. They can look right straight through your house and see everything, but we don't let them do that unless they got probable cause, because the Constitution says that they have to have probable cause to search you. You're supposed to be secured, your papers and effects. That's what the Fourth Amendment says. So if we don't treat the First Amendment that way, or the Fourth Amendment that way, we're not going to treat the Second Amendment that way. And yet, our director of TBI says that's exactly what he wants to do.
Technology changes the
any way he wants to. It's awful is what it is. But anyway, so that's one thing. Secondarily was the ability to protect private property with deadly force. We had a number of individuals in the House and Senate that were all in favor of that. I had worked on it hard. I'd talked to a lot of people. And originally in the United States, if someone tried to tote your horse off, you got to shoot him, because it was important. Your horse was very important. You had to plow with it. He was your mode of transportation, and your cow was how you fed yourself and you made money. And so a person could protect their personal property. Well, we can't do that anymore. In fact, I've got a clip of an attorney general here in the state of Tennessee from one of the districts says, no, that's the reason Tennessee is great. We don't allow that mess. We treat God's creatures better than in a self-defense situation where if you're being accosted and you're in fear of serious bodily injury or death, then we'll allow you then to protect yourself if you can prove that you're justified. But we're not going to let you do that to protect your property. That is so absolutely antithetical to anything that was America at our founding, especially Tennessee, because the Red Sticks were stealing our stuff. We went down and shot every one of them. And the governor called for it and said, come on, you volunteer. That's where we got the name, the Tennessee Volunteers, is when they called for those volunteers in Nashville to go with Colonel Jackson down into Alabama to fight the Red Sticks. And he called for 2,500 and over 5,000 showed up. That's where we got our name. It has nothing to do with a bunch of football players in Knoxville. Right. Or the Alamo, or the War of Independence of Texas. Has nothing to do with those, even though we were involved in that, Tennesseans as well. David Crockett, that group,
David Crockett, probably one of the best representatives to ever serve. We need to clone him and bring him back.
Well, yeah, his whole deal was, if I read the Constitution correctly, we have no right to give to charity any dime of the taxpayers' money. I'll do this for the people whose houses burned down over here in D.C. I'll give a month's wages. And if everybody will do the same, that'll be enough money to supply what you're wanting to do. But we have no ability under the Constitution to take anybody's tax money to do that. And what they do, they voted it through and didn't listen to it.
Not yours to give is one of his best speeches ever.
Yeah.
It should be required reading.
It should be. There are a lot of things that should be required readings for every one of our students because of the spine that Tennessee showed. Mm-hmm. But they don't want our children to know that. They don't want them to learn that we became a free nation with bloody hands and insurrection. And had we not done that, we'd still be slaves today. And they're moving us back towards serfdom now as hard as they can paddle that boat.
Right. We are the proverbial frog in the boiling pot of water with every session. I had somebody I was talking to a couple of years ago now, and we kind of equated government as being a pastry chef. You ever have a nice, light, fluffy pastry? It's because of the multiple layers of the pastry. And
Yeah,
that's what these legislators do. They put every puffy layer between us and our rights. And
that's right.
we sit along and we go along with it because
There was a state senator this year.
What's that?
I said there was a state senator this year that wrote an email to one of my friends who was a constituent of his, who was complaining about a usurpation of power and money from the people to do something that the legislature wanted to do. And the senator sent back to him and he said, "You don't understand how this works. We can operate sua sponte." And it just flew all over me because I understand what that term means. And what they try to do is they try to talk down to the average guy and make themselves sound like they're far more intelligent. And so the elite should be able to rule. And what we need to do is stand by the edge of the table and wait for the crumbs that they rake off. We had to go out and shoot it or buy it or raise it, bring it to them, cook it, fix it, put it on a plate and put it on the table. Let them eat first, and then we take the leavings. That's what our General Assembly has become. And it's become that way because we've allowed it. Now, a lot of people say that I'm being way too vitriolic. I think I'm just being sentient and seeing things for what they are.
Absolutely. And it's sad that not a lot of Americans and specifically Tennesseans see this anymore. I mean, we're so inundated with all the other crap that the slow erosion of our liberties at the hands of the very institution created to secure our liberties.
Right.
It's amazing to me.
And again, those people who are serving in those positions are doing so at our will, and they are to only exercise the powers delegated to them. I have another senator that's a good friend, and he has become an individual who will listen. And so he made a mistake on offering an amendment to a bill that actually quashed it and made it awful. And I just was very unhappy about it. And so as soon as I could get him on the phone, we had a conversation, and he will stand up and say, "I don't think I've ever took as bad a chewing in my life as I did from Archie." And then I found out that he was correct in doing so because I didn't understand. And so I think Article 1, Section 23 of the Tennessee Constitution lays a charge on every individual, every citizen, that we are supposed to instruct our representatives. That's a charge that we have. And if we don't, I challenge every person to have the cell phone number of their senator and their House member. If you don't have them, you are being recalcitrant, you're being lazy. And if they won't give it to you, fire them and get somebody who will, because it's their job to listen to you. It's your job to instruct them.
Yep.
So, and I can promise you, talk to Ed Jackson and Chris Todd, there's a lot of that goes on over in this district.
Right.
I know what time they leave the house to head to Nashville. I'm on the phone, got a captive audience. They can't say, "Well, no, I wasn't where I could." No, I know when you're in the car, I'm going to give you a call. Now,
nice.
Granted, Chris Todd's one of the best men in the legislature, and so it's not a heavy lift. And I talked to a bunch of them, but that's right. Anybody that serves on a committee, you're his constituent.
Absolutely.
And if they try to tell you, "Well, I'm only going to talk to those people in my zip code," you need to fire them, get somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
well, Mr. Archie, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and I'm looking forward to our next session. And you got anything else you want to point people in the audience to your website and all that? Just go ahead and share.
Well, just be aware that in Tennessee, it's a crime for you to carry a firearm. That needs to be pounded into the head of every person that we can get to look at it. And the only time that you can raise the defense that they charge you as a permit is when you go to trial. You're guilty if you shoot somebody, even in protection of your life inside your home. Even though they say we got a castle doctrine in Tennessee, we do not, because our government does not recognize that you have a right to self-defense, and that has to change.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time.
Very good. Thanks.
Well, folks, that's a wrap of our three-part interview with Mr. Archie. I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to having him on the program again in the future. A breadth and depth of knowledge about the patron state of shooting things, our beloved state of Tennessee. Now, as I promised early on in this interview series, I will let you know who an upcoming guest is. He is one of the true conservatives serving in the Tennessee General Assembly, and because of that, he caused a stir during the last regular session, as well as during Bill Lee's not so special session convened earlier this year to force the citizens of the state to fund private and public education. Speaking of that huge gift to donors that was mislabeled as the Education Freedom Act, wouldn't you know that there are reports of significant problems some people have encountered with signing up to get their piece of some quote unquote free stuff when the website went live last week? I'll be digging into that some more and bringing it to you in a future episode. Back to the upcoming guest, though. State Representative Jody Barrett has agreed to come on the program, and we will discuss some inside baseball type of stuff behind the shenanigans that occurred in the General Assembly earlier this year, and why that is important to every voter here in Tennessee. Right now, we're hammering out the schedule, but I hope to bring you the first of what looks to be a multi-part interview with Representative Barrett starting next week. For now, though, this week's wisdom from God's Word comes to us from the book of Jude, chapter 1, verse 4. For certain people have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were designated for this condemnation, ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into sensuality and deny our only Master and Lord, Jesus Christ. For some time now, decades in fact, and because of the apathy of the electorate here in Tennessee, ungodly people have crept into leadership positions in our state's government. They work hard behind the scenes to serve their true masters, the corporate donors and out-of-state interests. They routinely violate their oath of office and do so with impunity because they know they will not be held accountable at the ballot box. It's time we turn that around. Shake off that apathy and work to restore our state and our nation back to its founding principles. Once again, I would like to ask that you do me a favor and give this episode a thumbs up on Rumble or YouTube. Additionally, you can share the post from the podcast Facebook page or any of the many audio platforms the show is on to your social media accounts or with your email contacts. Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a stand in the arena together. Reveille, it's time to wake up.